Welcome to The Art Box, your podcast dedicated to exploring the vibrant art scene in Nevada and beyond. Join us as we embark on a journey through galleries, theaters, studios, public lands, and streetscapes, meeting the artists, curators, archaeologists, nature lovers, and cultural influencers who shape our creative community and our world. Whether you're looking for your next cultural adventure, seeking inspiration for your own artistic pursuits, or simply curious about the world of art, tune into The Art Box. Together, let's open up a world of creativity and imagination. Let's dive in.
Dreams, what if the night is about you and me? So lift your head up to the sky. The witness of your
Hey, Steve, it's a rainy day today.
It is raining, isn't it?
Snowing on the mountains.
Yeah, we're so happy. We always have snow on Virgin Peak by Thanksgiving.
That's true.
Yeah.
And we're talking to somebody up farther north than us, Pat Hickey. Pat, Steve has been hogging your book, but I understand that because he bought it. And I'm just looking at it, Here and Hereafter, Nevada Voices on Life in the Great Beyond, and it looks fascinating, doesn't it, Steve?
It has all the good people that I would like to talk to.
And some who are now determining whether there is a hereafter or not, like the good Senator Reid. I think I was, other than John Ralston, who's doing a significant biography on Harry Reid, I think I was probably the last reporter, if you will, or in my case columnist, to talk with him before he passed away. But he had some interesting things to say. But yes, Nevadans are fascinating, and there's a bunch of them, and their stories in this book.
And I noticed, as I was reading the preface, that you talk to believers as well as non-believers.
Oh, most definitely. It's certainly not a religious book. Each of the many memoirs, if you will, includes the various people, whether it was Mike Tyson or Brian Sandoval or Elaine Wynn or Oscar Goodman, all these Nevadans most of us know or know of. Talking to them, I spent 2 or 3 hours with each of them. It was during COVID when we all had, if you will, more time on our hands and questions about our mortality or not. But they were not just discussions about their views on life after death, if you will, or the afterlife or not, but just their views in general. And I did direct certain questions to believers. There were certainly, one notable person, Penn Jillette of Penn and Teller down at the Rio, southwest of you there. He's an avid and a very compelling atheist. So the discussion with him was quite fascinating, as were the discussions with Mike Tyson, who talked about death and some of his most recent psychedelic experiences. He's into, like a number of celebrities and others, toad venom that creates some sort of psychedelic experience. And he said in no uncertainty to me that he's seen the other side and he's quite convinced that it does exist. But that's Mike Tyson for you.
Yeah, he's a character. So, and a good person. My son worked at the Wynn, and Mike Tyson was always good for a good tip.
He's trying his best to be a good person, which is no easy task in front of him, given his background and his very difficult upbringing and everything. And much of it that he brought upon himself, self-admittedly. But he is trying his best to just become a normal and a good person, a good parent, in his case, to his latest round of children. It was quite heartening to speak with him. He's a very emotional man. He must have cried 4 or 5 times while in the course of our conversation.
Yeah, and it's okay to cry.
Yeah.
Actually, we just lost one of our guests. One of our original guests.
Oh,
yeah.
Harlow Burkholz.
Harlow Burkholz, who was one of the founders of the art gallery here. And one of the things he left Linda and I was, it's okay to cry.
Yeah. Well, sometimes that's easier said than done, especially for members of the male species. But I certainly am not unaccustomed or unacquainted with it. Plenty of things to shed a tear over, both happily and otherwise.
Oh, yeah, there can be joyful tears just as well.
Yeah.
Pat, I have all kinds of questions about your book, but before I share those questions with you, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your background, because I read just the very quick summary that you had about your life, and it's a story of contrasts. You were brought up as a Catholic, and later you had an arranged marriage by Reverend Moon.
Reverend Moon, yes.
Reverend
yes,
Moon.
In fact, I did.
And you refused to fight in Vietnam, and it was a conscientious refusal, although your father served in World War II. So let's talk about you a little bit. Who is this Pat, and how did he get here?
Well, I guess you could say he was a child of the 60s in some ways. I grew up in Lake Tahoe, was born in Carson City, but they didn't have a hospital in Tahoe at the time. I guess that makes me sound old, and I kind of am now, 74. My Irish ancestors came to the Tahoe area quite early in the 1860s and early 1870s, and I'm related to the family of ranchers that now own the Park Cattle Company and Edgewood, the celebrity golf course and high-end property that's right there at State Line in South Lake Tahoe. When I was a kid, it was just their grazing land, and we caught tadpoles and fished for brook trout in the same pond that Charles Barkley now shanks his tee shots into in their fancy golf course, but they're cousins. But I did grow up in Tahoe, went to high school there, went to college in California, started in 1968, which is, of course, a tumultuous year with the assassination of both Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. I did become opposed to the Vietnam War, not unlike a lot of young people, especially maybe from states like California, where there was more of a movement culturally and whatever against the war. I refused induction and thought I was going to prison, but as it turned out, when the war wound down, I didn't have to. It did create it was a contrast with my dad, who was a decorated World War II veteran in Burma, and that was a hard time on families and so on and so forth. But that was my life then. I had been a competitive skier and helicopter ski guide, but a seeker throughout it all, and I was one of the first persons to have joined the unification movement of the Reverend Moon in the early 1970s in Montana, where my grandparents on my mother's side of the family were from. And I was in that movement for a couple of decades, was a prominent leader in regional activities of the group, the church, and have kind of moved on past that, but take with me a lot of fond memories and a very wonderful wife. And I was the recipient of an arranged marriage with a very beautiful woman. She, at the time, was a librarian at UNICEF, and I had worked for UNICEF in Korea. We met there after being introduced by the Reverend, and went on to do other things, came back to Nevada, worked in journalism. I had known Rush Limbaugh in Sacramento before he became big, and so he got me a job reporting on politics in Nevada, and I eventually ended up running for the state legislature, served with someone in your neck of the woods named Crescent Hardy from Mesquite in that area. And after leaving that, Governor Sandoval appointed me to the State Board of Education. I've been very involved in charter schools, public charter schools in Nevada. I was one of the original sponsors of legislation to enable public charter schools, and I served as their executive director for 3 years after I left the legislature. And most recently, I've been writing for 5 years a column in the Reno Gazette-Journal, which is the Sunday or the weekly paper, daily paper, sort of what's left of newspapers up here, and called Memo from the Middle, where I write about politics. I'm now a political nonpartisan, although I was a Republican leader in the Nevada legislature when I was a member there.
So, well, that's interesting that you do charter schools. Just to let you know that our studio here is in the Mesquite Works STEAM Center, which is a STEM education, but I need to put the A in there for art and agriculture.
Yes. So A is not just for art, but agriculture in the Virgin Valley.
In this neighborhood, it is, yeah.
That's good.
It is. And actually, UNR has one of the storefronts here that belongs to Mesquite Works, and that's their 4-H center. They're yet to give us an interview yet, but they are there. And they're in.
Well, Brian Sandoval is in the book, the now president, former governor who I served under. He would probably, if you caught him in the right time, be happy to chat with you about... I know they have quite a presence in southern Nevada, and a lot of students from Las Vegas, of course, now attend UNR. I was just at a reception the other night for my book, and at the School of Journalism that I attended, there's quite a few students in Reno who are, of course, from families in Las Vegas and Mesquite and other places all around the state.
Pat, was there a specific teacher or professor who was a lot of influence on your career?
Well, my very first English teacher, and I went to school in California at Chico State, at that time the number one party school in the country, allegedly. I went there because my grandparents lived there. But I had an English professor who on the very first day of a college class asked us to write an essay on who would make a better president, Mickey Mouse or Richard Nixon. So I guess that sort of surprised us all and puzzled. And he left the room, and it puzzled us. We didn't know if he was serious or whether he was a communist radical or what. But he had quite an influence. I've always loved to write, and I did take a number of creative writing classes, and subsequently went back to school for a master's in journalism when I started getting jobs as a columnist and thing, and had no real formal training, but I guess I sort of do now.
What was your first newspaper article? And if you want to count the one that you did in third grade that your mom put up on the refrigerator or the icebox, you can.
That's a good question. Well, I actually went with a documentary filmmaker down the Mosquito Coast who was delivering medical supplies to the Mosquito Indians, who were an indigenous people who were fighting the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. It's quite a while ago. But we had quite a tumultuous experience with a boat that overturned in the river that separates Honduras and Nicaragua, and I wrote a story about that was carried through California and some things from the experiences that we had. But I've always loved to write, and after retiring from the legislature, in fact, my last year in the legislature, I wrote a daily blog called From Soup to Nuts, where I tried to pull back the curtain a little bit about the interesting, if not questionable, world of politics in the Silver State. I've written a lot over the years. This book really came about because I've been curious about the afterlife and the continuation of consciousness and is this all there is, or is there more, as the world's great religious traditions teach, but science is certainly exploring that possibility. And I thought, rather than writing about what my own thoughts and views would be, that I would just interview a bunch of other Nevadans, notable persons, many of them, not all of them, are well known, that are in the book, and get their views about those big picture questions.
Who did you find to be the most interesting Nevadan that you interviewed, and why?
Well, it would be hard to pick one out from any of the others. Certainly Harry Reid was quite fascinating. I mean, anybody that's lived here a long time knows of him, and they may be aware of his very difficult upbringing in Searchlight, born into a hard scrabble life. It's his dad, a poor and underemployed miner with a drinking problem. His mom, who had to make a living washing the sheets in the nearby brothel, and emerging as he eventually did after a very difficult life to become arguably the second most powerful political person in the world under presidents, and that being as Senate Majority Leader. So his life was really fascinating, and he had a really interesting thing to say about the afterlife. Going back to your original question, Linda, where you said, did you talk to believers only or ask believers? And I did. And especially if I knew someone was a Catholic, or in Mike Tyson's case, a Muslim, or Frankie Sudell Papa, our longtime, or the first woman attorney general in Nevada, who's now a practicing Buddhist, or Harry Reid, who's a member of the Church of the Latter-day Saints. So I asked them all kind of the same question at a certain point, and that is, when you pass away and pass over into whatever, will you see in heaven, whatever heaven might be in their mind, will you see only Mormons or members of your own faith? And Harry Reid's answer, I thought, was really a good one. He said, I hope to hell not, and went on to say that he hoped he would meet with former Governor Mike O'Callaghan, who had been his mentor and kind of a father figure, who was a practicing Catholic. And there was a lot of that kind of more universal thinking, even for strong believers. Their sense is that God or whatever is out there may be larger than, in many cases, their own particular theologies.
Did interviewing these different people have any effect on your personal feelings about the afterlife?
Well, I guess it was reassuring hearing the views and exploring the thoughts of interesting Nevadans. How did it affect my own view? I guess I would say that it reassured me that people have a sense that there's more to life than meets the eye, and that most people, even the non-religious among them, John Ralston, the pundit-in-chief, publisher of the Nevada Indie, who has no whatsoever religious background, but he's always had a sense that life continues beyond. He doesn't have any particular ideas, and even those that have can't be certain. But I guess I was reassured to think that most people consider that how they've lived their life, not necessarily what they've believed or what organization, church, synagogue, or otherwise they may have belonged to, isn't as important as how they've lived their lives. And many of them, I will tell you, have had, some certainly had near-death experiences. Certainly a number of them have had experiences, and I would include myself in this, although I didn't write about them, with passed away relatives. A number of people in the book had experiences when, and maybe were there when, a parent or a spouse passed away and had certain experiences, heard things, saw things, felt things continuously for years. So there's a sense among many that this isn't necessarily the end. But again, this was not a theological exploration to try to define what heaven or hell or life is, but just to hear how various people think about their lives and what the impact their lives may be upon life, if in fact it does continue as many believe, including myself.
I'm curious if you found that there was a difference between the men and the women?
Not necessarily in terms of their views. I think the women in the book, by nature, were maybe a little more intuitive or spiritual, and I'm not trying to categorize or generalize, but I think women, tended to be more connected to their loved ones, and maybe that gave rise to a certain sense that they're still with them on some level or in some capacity. Everyone was very, very different. I mean, one of the women, you wouldn't probably know her, Renee Reed, was a Catholic nun who married a Catholic priest and had some very interesting stories to talk about and what she went through with that. Again, many people have had traumatic things happen in their life. Sig Rogich, the famous PR guy who started R&R Partners, the firm in Vegas that created What Happens in Vegas Stays in Vegas. And he was an original TV producer for Ronald Reagan and George Bush for all of their television commercials. But he grew up, he's a media genius and a multimillionaire, but he grew up in Boulder City. His dad had immigrated from Iceland to work on the Hoover Dam or the Boulder Dam. Never had a TV in the house until he was in high school because they lived in, the public housing or the employee housing out there in Boulder City. So just interesting stories from people with very humble beginnings. Even Elaine Wynn, you mentioned the Wynn's earlier, Steve, where your son had worked at the Wynn. She had a very normal upbringing and, of course, married Steve Wynn and is now the recipient of much of his beholdings because of problems he had in his personal life. She's certainly a very accomplished billionaire corporate leader as a woman, but she had very humble beginnings as a young woman. So there were a lot of stories like that just kind of peeled back the humanity on people and how decent, how good, and I would add, how important people's families and how much of an influence parents, especially, and grandparents and others, played on the evolution of each person.
So, I've read, I think, 6 chapters. Unfortunately, I didn't get to read all of them, but I don't believe I read one where the person had an after-death experience. Did you have any?
Let's see, who would that... Well, I mean, not that are still, that are still with us.
Yeah, because we
do you mean a near-death experience, Steve?
A near-death experience,
well,
or after death.
Yeah, I would say after death, and
Okay.
and we had we've had a guest who had an after-death experience.
Okay.
And I didn't interview her because I was afraid. Linda, I think you were in on it with Tyler. Maybe it was just Tyler.
It was just Tyler.
Yeah, because Tyler does those kind of interviews. But, hers was interesting. It was enough to get her interviewed by Howard Stern. But, she had some interesting insights on her after-death experience.
Well, do you mean she had communication with someone that was in, if you will,
She
the spiritual
died.
world?
She died.
Oh, she died.
And then came back.
But came back.
Yes.
Yeah.
Maybe after-death experience isn't the right way to say it, but that's...
Well, I think it's more commonly referred to as near-death experiences, where people see themselves, say, in an operating room or outside a horrible traffic accident. They see their bodies being extracted, and they're sort of separate from their body. And I did spend, in researching the book, a full day with the rather noteworthy author, a fellow by the name of Raymond Moody, who coined the term near-death or life after life is his book. He once taught a seminar at UNLV, but he sold, 20 million copies of his book. He was a physician who kept hearing stories of people that were having these out-of-body experiences. And I did spend time with him, and it seems like the account that people record and have heard from others are very similar in that regard. And so people in the book, no one specifically had one of those kinds of experiences, but they have had experiences with passed away relatives, spouses, and others.
Now, I know you also referenced Philip Burley, Conversations with the Dead, and you said that he had spoken to Abe Lincoln, Albert Einstein, and Mother Teresa.
Yes, well, I taught a class on the proof of the afterlife existence at a community college here before doing the book, because I wanted to basically just educate myself, and he was one of the persons who I had students in the class read his accounts. And then I talked with him subsequently, and he actually spoke. It was during COVID, so it was via Zoom, but he spoke to persons in the class. And he's a psychic who claims to have the ability through hypnosis, and he works with a PhD person, to have conversations with these notable figures. There were a bunch of them, like you say, in his particular book. And were quite fascinating. I can't attest to the validity of it. He certainly claims to have that psychic or paranormal ability to communicate with people in what he would call a spiritual realm of sorts. But that's not really what the book is about. I talk to people about their views, but it's just sort of a sense, what does your life mean now? What do you think your legacy may be? How do you want to be remembered? If there is something that comes next, are you beginning to conduct a life review? You know, we spend so much time with estate planning and wills and, the beneficiaries of whatever small properties or inheritances most of us have, but we do very little, quote unquote, estate planning for the next realm or preparation. I think it's, in my mind, probably a good thing to keep an open mind and therefore not be surprised if we do find ourselves still existing in some state of consciousness or soul or spirit. If we don't, it won't matter anyway because we won't know the difference. But if we do, it might be worthwhile to be given it some thought.
That's a really good point. Pat, you interviewed 34 people for the book, some of them very famous Nevadans. How did you decide which people to interview?
Well, because I've been an elected official and a reporter and a columnist, I knew many of them or had connections, had interviewed them, or had a relationship with someone who, Sig Rogich, the big PR guy, got me in contact with Mike Tyson. And so I networked, some of my contacts. Many of the people I had known or they had known me because I was in public life. I tried to get a diversity. I think there's 17 individuals from northern or rural Nevada and 16 from southern Nevada and Las Vegas. There's a diversity of faiths, of races, of backgrounds. Not all are multimillionaires like Sig Rogich. I interviewed a young man, not a young man anymore, but he was a young man when he ended up on death row in Nevada for 28 years and was eventually paroled by Governor at that time Kenny Gwinn and Brian Sandoval when he was Attorney General. Talked about his life since he's gotten out of, death row, and he freely admits and owns the fact that he killed someone as a 19-year-old foolish young man that was co-opted by another criminal who gave him the gun and shot somebody, not intentionally, but did. So there were just a lot of different kinds of people. I tried to, have a mixture of faiths, of backgrounds and experiences, some well-known, but not all of them. And a lot of people that probably should be in the book like this who aren't. I had Carlos Santana, the guitarist, who's quite a spiritual guy. And I had the interview, but his publicist had problems with it and never got included because of printing deadlines. So there were some people I wished I would have spoken with that I didn't. But all the people that I did, we just had an event at the university's journalism school where I was a part of, where 10 of the 34 people from Northern Nevada came, and it was just a fascinating exchange, and how many of them are reading each other's chapters, getting to know each other better, calling one another, and so it was a real beautiful thing to see how close and how unique of persons and characters, as you said earlier, Steve, many Nevadans are.
Yeah, and the book is beautiful because I'm a fan of people, and reading, forgetting about any near death or anything like that, just hearing what's important to these people that I never knew and it wasn't in the news. They're really good reads.
Yes. I came away just really very hopeful about the goodness within people. And even though many of them have been successful, they've certainly gone through their challenges, divorces, loss of children, loss of political races, whatever, prestige. But, emerging from it all, I think the values that people have, however they've arrived at them, are what get them through things, and their relationships. very, very important to people, their friendships, their spouses, their children, their grandparents, so on and so forth. A lot of beautiful stories in there that were very touching to me, and I think to a lot of people who've read them.
Yeah, sometimes I would say, where's the next chapter? Where's the next chapter? Come on, Pat.
Well, we'll see about that. I probably ought to have included a lot more people, but I am working on another book about my wife, who's Korean, and I'm calling it Myung-hee, Her American Life, because as a woman who immigrated here, she's had a very fascinating life, and I have a publisher in Korea that is curious because, we're such an international community now that people are curious what it's like when they do immigrate to another country and the things they go through.
That was going to be my next question. So if you were going to write more books, and you've explained that, good. I look forward to that as well. That should be really interesting.
Well, you're very connected to the art community. I think the chapter you would enjoy, there's one artist in the book, and it's his photo that's on the cover, Jeff Mitchum. He's in the book. He has had a gallery both at the Bellagio and the MGM, but he's a very well-known National Geographic photographer who's really an artist. And if you read his chapter, he really goes into what has moved him artistically to create the profession that he has and be as successful. That particular photo on the book is in the Guinness Book of World Records because he sold it for $1.8 million, the original color print.
Wow.
And I didn't have to pay a penny because he's in the book. But that's... From the art side, I think you'll enjoy his chapter, just how he's approached photography as art. And that was very instructive to me. He was Ansel Adams, the famous black and white photographer in Yosemite fame, was his mentor when he was a young person. He tells the story of how he followed Ansel Adams around in Yosemite and kind of learned things and eventually set out on his own.
Pat, can you tell us about your childhood library? I assume there was one in Lake Tahoe.
Well, I read a lot of Hardy Boys stories. When I'd get in trouble, which was frequently, my mom would she'd ground me and make me read books, some of them by Mark Twain, which, boy, was that ever worthwhile. And by the way, the Mark Twain impersonator, McAvoy Lane, who's quite a well-known Nevadan, is in the book and talks about some of his close encounters with Mark Twain in the book. But I diverge. I did read a lot as a child, and I thank my parents for that. And I'm a little sad today to see how little, not all young people, but many young people just don't expand their imagination through reading in ways they could have.
I'd love to ask you, because this is, politics has been really big recently, if you learned a lot being in the political world.
Yes, well, having served in the House of Ill Repute, as it's sometimes called, in the Nevada legislature, it did teach me a number of things. There's a lot of good people that go into politics. The process itself does tend to challenge your integrity and your trust in the honesty and transparency of people. You certainly learn a lot of lessons, and some of them are disappointments. Elected officials, people praise them and embellish things and tell them things that aren't necessarily true in order to court favor with them. So I learned a lot of things about life. I was honored to have been able to serve, and I was there in a couple different eras. So I served in two different centuries and two different decades at various times, because I came and went back and came again. So that was interesting to get a different perspective, but that's probably for another discussion.
Right.
But, life is certainly bigger than politics, and I'm glad to have writing and the opportunity, I do a Sunday column that's called Memo from the Middle, and I'm no longer a member of a political party. I'm a nonpartisan, and so I try to write recognizing the values and the issues from both sides, and then offer my own point of view. And I think most people are not on the extreme right or the extreme left, but are more or less in the middle, left of center, right of center, whatever. So I think we have a lot more in common than we have differences, and I guess that's something I've learned over time.
Last question, if you're okay with that. What's inspired you this past week, Pat?
This past week, I'll tell you what really inspires me is our newest granddaughter, who we get to take care of a few times a week while mom and dad go shopping or get to have a date or a lunch together without caring for a child. The next generation kind of just renews our hope in the future and the hope that we'll make a better world for them. So we now are grandparents of 4, soon to be 5 grandchildren. That's been one of the greatest joys in my life, to get to that stage where you can look upon the future and be hopeful about it.
Yeah, I bet they're happy to go visit Grandpa.
And Grandma especially. But yeah, my one granddaughter really likes me for some odd reason.
Yeah, it's probably because you sneak her candy and things that Grandma wouldn't allow.
She's only a year and a half. She eats really healthy things and seems to like them. But she likes hanging around with Papa, so I'm good with that.
That's great. Thank you so much for spending time talking with us today, Pat. Your book.
Thank you both for doing this and having me. I don't know if people are interested. I do have a website. You probably saw that, Steve. But if you don't mind mentioning it, it's pathickey.net, and they could look at the book and look at some of the reviews from other authors and of course, order a copy if people are so inclined.
So, and want to talk about where your new book, Here and Hereafter, is available at?
It's right now, it's available only at the Barnes & Noble in Reno. I haven't yet gotten it in other stores down there. It's at the Nevada Museum of Art, and I'm doing a lot of sort of independent events. I was just at Barnes & Noble yesterday, sold almost 40 books, so it went very well.
Yeah, nice.
So I'm kind of just promoting it on my own because I get to have a personal connection with people when I sell them that way.
Yeah. And that's, it's funny that when I know the author, the book means so much more to me. That's never going to be taken to the store and given away or anything.
Yeah.
So I was just at the Nevada Humanities Literary Crawl, a month ago or so. Were you around?
Yes. My book hadn't been printed by the publisher by then. I think I'm going to be part of a panel in something in next year's, supported by Nevada Humanities. So we're in discussions with them. I'm doing an event coming up, the Nevada Museum of Art. I'm giving a lecture there, and they're sponsoring a really nice event there on December 12th at Reno's Nevada Museum of Art. I'm going to be giving a lecture on the book and signing copies, and a bunch of the people in the book are going to come there as well. So that's going to be a fun event.
Oh, that's nice.
How exciting.
Yeah.
I wished I lived in Reno.
Well, you live in a beautiful part of the world. I've been to Mesquite, Virgin Valley a few times. Our son used to play high school baseball. We would play the Virgin Valley and what's the other high school out there?
Moapa
Valley. We played baseball against them in that nice baseball field. It's right beneath the freeway there. So I've been there, played some golf there, and visit. Crescent Hardy was an assemblyman from out there and a congressman from out there who was a friend. But anyway, I better go and regain my voice a little bit before my 2:30 meeting. So,
sure.
Pat, thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda and Steve both. Bless you both, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Pat. I can hardly wait to read your book. I was only teasing about Steve hogging it, so here I have it. And
well, thank you for buying it. I wish if you'd have been closer, I would have just given you a free one, but thank you, Steve, for doing it.
All righty.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Bye, Pat.
Same to you. Bless
Bye.
you both. Bye-bye.
Broadcasting from the Mesquite Works Steam Center in the scenic Mojave Desert, the Art Box sponsors thank you for listening. You can find us on Spotify, Samsung, iHeartRadio, Podchaser, and Amazon Music. Please subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We are on Facebook and Instagram as The Art Box. We welcome all comments. You can email us at artboxvv@gmail.com. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of its hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of our sponsors.